Welcome to today's episode of the podcast. I am really grateful today to have with us Dr. Susan Fletcher, who is a psychologist from Texas and also more recently licensed in Colorado. Interestingly, don't everybody rush off and go grab her because I'm going to try to take her for myself. Just kidding. But I'm so glad to have you with us. She has a vast amount of information to share. It's so hard to cull down to even just an hour for sure. But welcome and thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Give us a little of your background that maybe would tip off to both sets why this would be interesting for them to listen to.
So I had a clinical practice for over 25 years, just like many of the people out there that have a license in the mental health field that are on their own. I had a practice where I saw a majority of families, a lot of children. And in the early years of my practice, I started to feel very comfortable with the court environment, which is unusual for someone in my profession. But I was very comfortable with it because I worked a lot with kids and I worked with populations that were court involved, but not related to family law. And over time, I got to know a lot about families in different stages where they at some point may end up in two households due to a divorce. So I've seen the families when they're intact, when they're struggling. I've done marital therapy. I've worked with kids just related to changes and the transition. And then over time, it just sort of occurred. It wasn't a deliberate move on my part, but I started working more with court involved families that are involved in the family law system. So that is my specialty now. That's what I do. I don't take any private referrals anymore. That was really sad for me because I enjoyed seeing a lot of progress with people who were there voluntarily. And what I do now, a lot of times I'm appointed by court to work with a family or provide an evaluation. For the professionals that are listening to the podcast, and one interesting fun fact is that at a point in time, I also left the profession and went to work at Quantum Sciences. And what that is that's the company that was at one time run by Dr. Phil McGraw, the one that with the TV show.
Oh,
And
okay.
so in Texas, for people that are old enough to remember, there was a big case that was the cattlemen. They sued Oprah. And as part of that, Phil McGraw, who is actually a psychologist, he is no longer licensed as a psychologist, but that's a story for another time. But he started working in litigation because that was his area of interest in his research for his dissertation. And so soon after he finished with the Oprah trial and the mad cow disease trial, I met him, knew some people that knew him, and he somewhat courted me to become a part of his organization. So in that role, I was a litigation specialist where I assisted experts in their testimony as well as fact witnesses, and also did mock trials and many things like that. So worked for him for a period of time and then came back to my practice. And so I've seen different sides of it. Working as a litigation specialist, I was part of a legal team assisting with trials as well as, again, mock trials and things like that. So now I'm very comfortable. I'm very involved in the community of family law. I do a little bit of criminal law, but I really enjoy working in family law and working with families.
I'm having a little bit of a hard time fighting the fight about, the lingo around custody, right? Because a lot of people, you, me, many professionals have fought for a long time. Let's not call it custody. It goes back to the chattel in the law of like, kids are owned by the dad, for this patriarchal ownership system, right? And so we in the industry have worked hard to make it about parenting time and decision making, but it's interesting because it's very hard to stop parents, marketing people, all these different people, like the industry outside of just what we talk about really does still call it that. Like you look at the Google searches, it's like parents call it custody all the time. I do think it's a super important nuance um, because these language really does matter in what we
It
call it.
does. When a divorce occurs, for a majority of the population, more is the same than is different. And I think we forget that too. And it's important to help children see that. I don't believe we should make promises to kids we can't keep. So if a parent says, I promise you we can stay in the house. I promise you can stay at the same school. I promise you that I can still afford to have you in competitive cheerleading or, travel, lacrosse, things like that. Be really careful about that because with a divorce, there's some changes, obviously, and some financial responsibilities and resources. So I don't want to give the impression that it's okay to promise something that you may not be able to follow through with. But I do want to help families recognize that it's important to point out things for children, no matter what age they are, that more is the same than is different. What is the same is I love you and your mom or dad also love you. What is the same is we're still going to go to back to school night in the beginning of the school year together. What is the same is that at least for now, through the end of the school year, I know we're going to be in this house as some things and some decisions are made. Versus what kids are going to notice is what is different. There's an empty chair at the table in the kitchen where one of the parents used to sit. Or I'm with dad and mom is the one who knows how to braid my hair. So they're going to already pick up on, and they're going to be hyper vigilant for things that are different. So it's important to reinforce where you can and you feel pretty certain that something is the same compared to different, and role model that for kids. We're not trying to put wool over their eyes. And we're not trying to mislead them, but I think we do need to show where more is the same than is different because that's the goal. When there are two households, the goal is there's still a family system. They're operating from two households, and the hope and the expectation is that the parents don't let their own conflict influence their ability to parent or interfere with that child's ability to have a healthy relationship with the other parent.
What are some signs that parents might need to be aware of that their child is struggling emotionally, even
Mhm.
if they're saying they're fine?
Right. I think it's a great question because there are signs. And what I've seen over time is that kids tend to start isolating. And it's important to compare your child's behavior with their previous behavior. So if previously your child came home from school and spent an hour and a half playing video games, but then came out of his or her room and got a snack and was, interacting with you and engaging with you, okay, then that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a negative sign, but it's a change in that. It's where they are in their room, maybe staring at the wall. Are they in there longer? When they come out, they get something to eat, but they're not engaging with you. So the sense of isolation or the observation of their behavior is being more about isolation and avoidance, and to really, really be on the lookout for that. And don't probe them and say, "What's going on? How come in your room so long?" Okay, that doesn't really help anything. But by saying, "Hey, listen, I'm gonna sit down and watch the show on Netflix you told me about. If you want to come out and watch it with me, I'd love to have you." Or saying, "I'm gonna make myself a snack. Would you like some?" Do something that creates an environment where it's inviting to engage without poking around at their feelings and emotions because they may not be accessible to them or they may not make them accessible to you at that moment. So isolation's one. Another one is withdrawing from friends. So things that they might have wanted to do previously. And these are also signs of depression. But I think it's important that we recognize that there might be some of that short term that maybe isn't something to worry about, but it's the persistence of those behaviors. Look at their grades. I think all parents should be looking in the parent portal of their children's school to see whether they're turning in assignments or if there seems to be a trend that's going down a bit with their academics. And again, don't probe, offer opportunity. Say, I'm going to run to the library or this coffee shop and work on something from work for work. You want to go there with me and you can do some of your homework. Make some things inviting, try to engage without feeling punitive to your child. The only other thing is that really pay attention to whether your children are talking in language that's negative and kind of fatalistic versus able to look at the positive and opportunities or asking the kind of questions that might be expected. For example, I worked with a family for a long time that the mom, when the divorce occurred, she and the children moved in with her parents. And she had to share a room with the daughter, and then the son slept on the couch. And it was meant to be short term, but because of a series of situations, they were there probably about 2 years, and that's not ideal. And so one of the things that I think was a subtle turn is her son started to make comments like, it's never going to get better. This is just, this was supposed to be short term. You lied to me. They were struggling with being able to look at, okay, we got to figure out how to deal with this. And kids don't understand financial resources and limitations or some of those things. Um, and some of that's developmentally appropriate, even in intact families. But looking for those things, looking for the fatalistic thinking, the things that they're saying, and an inability to have hope, look for those things. And also talk to your friends who have children that are the same age as yours that your kids hang out with, or they're in the same classes. And you might want to say, I know that you care about us and you respect us and my kids. And if there's anything I need to know that you find out, just want you to know I'm open to hearing it. Giving your friends permission to tell you things they may notice because they may see some things before you do.